Let me put the me. Okay. All right. What's up, guys? Pretty sure we're live right now. We should hopefully be. Um. Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of free run this. I'm gonna talk about a few things, and let's first start off with Bitcoin. So obviously the price is down right now, but I think a lot of people gotta remember. Let's see how much down the price is. Price is down 10%. All right, 10% is not really 10%. So what? Who cares? You know. The 21 week EMA is all the way down at 79,000. You know, like 20 week SMA is down at 74,000. So you know the price is pretty extended from the 20 week. I mean, I think a lot of people don't even realize too. We're at the same price we were at last week. I mean, crypto last week Bitcoin hit 105K for the first time, but the low for last week was 94K. So we are where we were last week. Like, you know, that's why it's very easy to forget where the price was a week ago because sometimes the price moves so fast, but you know, it's sometimes it's easy to forget that. Looking at the 20 week though, pretty interesting because at the high over here, the price did get about 46% extended from the 20 week, which is a little bit extended. If you go to March, the price got, I mean, it says it was at 46,000 exactly. So if we go to March and we take that, I'm going to zoom in a little bit to get a more accurate measurement. But if we go to 46,000 exactly, right? And then we measure that wick, price was 60% above the 20 week. If we go all the way back to 2021, April 2021, that first top, you know, the price was a little less extended, arguably because it started to kind of go sideways. But like even comparing to, let's say 2017, which was a crazy blow off top, pretty sure it was much more extended. So it says the 20 week was at 6,700, right? And then if we measure it to the top, yeah, 195% extended from the 20 week moving average. We're probably not going to see that in today's age, because of diminishing volatility and all that. So something to definitely keep in mind. But it did get a little bit extended. You know, there's theories about a left translated peak, which I think it's possible, but I don't think it's likely. I think the market might want to cool down, possibly going into next year. You know, I've been fairly confident that there might be a correction in January. It's definitely possible. You know, the market did have a correction January 2021 after its December rally. But, I mean, even if it goes down to the 20 week, you know, that's going to be a, look at that, 30% correction. Interestingly enough, Bitcoin hasn't had a 30% correction when accounting for daily closes in like 800 days. So that's something else to keep in mind. Bitcoin is due for a 30% correction. I don't know when it's going to happen. You know, I don't want to be the guy calling just the boy who cried a 30% correction. But, you know, it's going to happen eventually. But interestingly enough, where the 20 week is right now, that would be a 30% correction. That's all the way down at 74K, which might sound crazy, but, you know, we got to remember where the price was in recent times. Bitcoin was at that price in November, you know? So you got to remember that. I'm not trying to be a mega bear, which I'm not, but, you know, even this too, take a look at this. You know, I'm not the biggest fan of trend lines because all trend lines are meant to be broken. But even if you just draw this trend line, it would be interesting to see if Bitcoin kind of comes down and retest this trend line. If it were to do something like that, that would be all the way down at 63K. You know, I think 63K sounds crazy right now, but guys, we gotta be a little realistic. You know, anything is really possible. Just because Bitcoin went up to 100K doesn't mean that it can't come back down into the 60s. Like, you know, so that's something to definitely keep an eye out for. And one thing that's kind of connected to this is a big thing that happened this week was the Fed. So the Federal Reserve, they obviously cut their interest rates, but that's not really the whole story. The story is the slowdown of the rate cuts. So basically the SEP, they were projecting 4 rate cuts for next year, and now they're only thinking that the Fed is going to do 2 rate cuts next year, which was pretty hawkish. They're thinking that basically Powell made it seem like they're going to slow down the cutting, which markets did not like. Look at the S&P. S&P sold off. It bounced today, but, you know, it's, you know, the S&P likes to climb the wall worry, though, I will say. You know, it's, you never really know what the S&P is. That's why it's risky to call the top on the stock market, because 90% of the time you'll just be wrong, and then it'll just put in a new top. So stock market is a different story, but if we go to interest rates, down at 4.5%, you know, they're probably not going to cut in January. They're going to probably pause. But that was the big news of this week, that the Fed is probably going to slow down their cutting. And it's because of inflation. They really don't want inflation to reaccelerate. That's the risk, inflation. And they don't want things to be like the 1970s. You know, that'll just be a disaster if we get a second wave of inflation. That'll be horrible. Nobody wants that. The Fed definitely doesn't want that. And overall, the unemployment rate is relatively low. Now, it's obviously trending up, which is not a good thing, but it's still relatively low. The problem is when it starts to get uncontrollable and it starts to shoot up like this. 4.2% isn't the problem. The problem is if it just starts really accelerating fast and starts to shoot up. That's the problem. The Fed doesn't want that. So the Fed has their dual mandate of keeping the unemployment rate low, but also keeping inflation low. The problem is, though, when they cut rates, it's going to not really help both of those at the same time. It's only going to help one. When they hike rates, it's only going to help one, not the other. It's hard for them to really control both with interest rates. Now, obviously, there's other factors that are going to go into the unemployment rate and inflation, but this is not a macroeconomic video. The point is, though, is that this is something to keep an eye out for Bitcoin, because I can imagine that if inflation really starts to reaccelerate and the Fed has to really stop cutting, you know, Bitcoin might suffer, and it's just going to be interesting to see. Now, one thing I do want to bring up, though, is ETH Bitcoin, because ETH Bitcoin isn't really doing so good. I personally thought that ETH Bitcoin would bottom between 0.03 to 0.04. I really didn't even think it would go down to like the lower 0.03s, but it did. You know, I mean, ETH Bitcoin has just suffered the past 3 years. I mean, this high is in December 2021. We're in December 2024. ETH Bitcoin is down 60%. Essentially, However, whatever ETH you've been holding throughout this whole time, you would have had 60% more Bitcoin if you just held it. This is the problem. People forget that you have to pay attention to the Bitcoin pair. What's the point of holding an asset if Bitcoin's just going to outperform it? There's no point. It doesn't matter. Like, look at the merge, for example. And by the way, I want to be fully transparent. I own ETH. My portfolio is like, right now it's like 20% ETH. And it's been, funny enough, it was actually 50-50 back up here. But it automatically adjusted for itself on this move down. So I made the mistake of holding more ETH than I wanted to. But I at least knew that you got to hold some Bitcoin during the bear market. And even during the pre-halving here, because it's the way the cycle works. But look at the merge. This move up, this 70% move up going into the merge. Even the merge rally wasn't a new high. Even that was a lower high. And I mean, even going back to this November 2021 high, that wasn't even, it didn't even get to 0.1. So that was already concerning itself. But I'm not trying to bash ETH because I think ETH is a good asset. But you have to understand, like, there's times when you got to hold it and when not to hold it. But going back to 2019, you can see ETH Bitcoin did put in a double bottom pretty much. It put in its low. Kind of got rejected by the 20-week. Put in a second double bottom. And then it started taking off. Was off to the races. One thing I like to compare it to, though, is total assets, okay? So if you look at total assets by the Fed, you can see right when QE started, that's when ETH Bitcoin bottomed. Literally the same week. Is that going to play out this cycle? Well, it's pretty close. You know, QE hasn't technically started yet, but, you know, it would be interesting if ETH Bitcoin, I don't know if ETH Bitcoin is going to put in another low, a lower low from this current low. I mean, I really don't know. I feel like we're going to find out in the next week or two. I think ETH Bitcoin, if it hasn't bottomed already, it's going to bottom in the next few weeks. But it's going to be interesting to see if ETH Bitcoin ends up bottoming when QE starts, which, by the way, is the pink line. It's total assets of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. So obviously when they're doing QT, they're rolling assets off their balance sheet, and they're not pumping. When they're buying assets, they're essentially pumping money into the economy. And when they're rolling assets off their balance sheet, they're doing the opposite. So that's why it's QT versus QE. But this is something to really pay attention to because ETH Bitcoin has really been struggling. I'm not going to lie. After ETH Bitcoin put this low in right here, I was really convinced that that could have been the bottom. I was expecting it to get above the 20-week SMA. But past 2 weeks, it's been getting rejected. So I don't know what's going to happen. I hope maybe it's putting in just a double bottom. Because if it does put in a double bottom, that's a good... It is good for ETH. I mean, look at XRP. Look what happened when XRP put in its double bottom. Look at this. Bottom 1, bottom 2. Had a huge pump. That's what you want to see in these altcoins. Most of these altcoins just bleed the hell against Bitcoin. I mean, look at ADA. ADA was bleeding like crazy. ADA went down 92% against Bitcoin. If you were holding ADA throughout this whole move down, gosh, rest in peace to your Bitcoin valuation. But, I mean, even after putting in this bottom, it wasn't necessarily a double bottom. But when you compare it to back over here, I don't know if that's cherry picking, but it had a nice bounce. That's what you want to see. Link Bitcoin is something that I've been looking at, but I don't really know. Like, Link has just been struggling ever since August 2020 against its Bitcoin pair. So I don't know what Link is going to do. I think Link could be a good buy as long as the market doesn't really tank. If Bitcoin has a big correction, though, like a 30% correction like I mentioned earlier, it's possible Link Bitcoin goes back down to these lows over here. Something to definitely look out for. Even BNB Bitcoin. BNB Bitcoin could possibly go back down to this low. It has some. It looks like it maybe will find support around this 0.005 mark. BNB Bitcoin is one to watch, but another one, Sol too. Can't forget about Sol. I know a lot of people that were so crazy about Solana. Solana, don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with Solana, except for the few problems that people will argue on the internet. But I mean, Solana was a good performer against Bitcoin. Starting in June 2023, it was doing really good. It was up 500% against Bitcoin, but then it started to kind of chill out and not really do much the past couple months. Pretty much actually this whole year, if I'm gonna be honest. But Solana Bitcoin is at these lows for the year, and I think it's gonna be interesting to see if it really starts to break down or if it can hold here. Because, we're going into the post-halving year. People are going to be speculating alt season. It's just something to keep an eye out. These Bitcoin pairs, I'm telling you guys, these Bitcoin pairs are the most important thing. Like, if you're not going to own Bitcoin, you have to look at the Bitcoin pair. The USD valuation does not matter. You have to train your mind to look at these crypto coins, these altcoins, and value them in units of Bitcoin. The USD valuation does not matter. I'm telling you guys, it does not matter at all. It doesn't matter if your XRP is $2.28. It doesn't matter. How many Satoshis is it worth? That's what matters. It doesn't matter if ETH is $3,400, $3,000, $2,000. It doesn't matter. How many Satoshis is it worth? And how many Satoshis was it worth a year ago? Because at the end of the day, it all goes back to Bitcoin. If your altcoin is not outperforming Bitcoin, then there's 0 point in holding it at all. It doesn't matter about tokenomics. It doesn't matter about utility. None of these altcoins barely have any utility. I'm not one to shit on altcoins, because some of these altcoins do offer good solutions, but we're just not there yet. Bitcoin has been the only one that truly has stood the test of time, besides Ethereum and some other altcoins that have been around for previous cycles. But even XRP, for example, look at XRP Bitcoin. I mean, it's just been it hasn't really been doing anything, And I hate to say it, but even ETH Bitcoin, right? The fact that it never went to 0.1 honestly scares me, because if it didn't go to 0.1 after the merge, why the hell should it do it this cycle? What's going to make ETH Bitcoin go to 0.1? What is it going to be? What narrative is it going to be? Because people are always looking for the narrative. So, the fact that it didn't even visit the highs from 2017, that's concerning. Obviously, there was a point where ETH did outperform Bitcoin, but you have to be careful for these Bitcoin valuations, because if you're holding altcoins while they're just getting destroyed on their Bitcoin pair, you're losing out. It doesn't matter if the altcoin went up in price. If the Bitcoin valuation is going down more, then you're missing out. It's called opportunity cost. It's finance 101. But a lot of people don't understand opportunity cost. It's something that really gets overlooked. Another thing I'll bring up too, this is kind of macro related. A lot of people are speculating on what the dollar is going to do. I don't know if I have a dollar chart. I do. Dollar's at 107. A lot of people think it's going to break up. A lot of people think it's going to break down. Personally, I don't really have that good of a guess on where it's going to go. I think the dollar could be... It could depend on where the 10-year yield is going to go. Let's look at the 10-year yield real quick. Let's also overlay the S&P 500. All right? Put it on a new price scale. You'll notice when the 10-year yield is going up, the S&P is pretty much trending down. Look right here. September 16th, 2024. I'll zoom in a little bit. Every time the 10-year yield starts to make a move up, the S&P has sold off. Even look right here. So you can see 10-year yield was going down. S&P kept moving higher. But once the 10-year yield broke out, like right here this week of January 2022, S&P had its correction. Now, that was 2 years ago, all right? Which is crazy to think it was already 2 years ago. But I'm not 100% sure that the 10-year yield is going to go all the way back up here and break out, back above 5%. I don't think that's going to happen. If you actually want to draw a trend line, the 10-year is actually at its trend line. Is it? Not really. It actually, interestingly enough, it actually broke out. So this is actually interesting. 10-year yield actually broke out of this little trend line. Like I said, all trend lines are meant to be broken. Is it going to go all the way back up to here, go back above 5%? I don't know. But point is, though, sometimes when the 10-year yield breaks out and starts making a move higher, the S&P will go down. It'll struggle. So this is something to keep an eye out also. If the 10-year keeps going up, S&P is probably going to go down. Then, Bitcoin might struggle as well. But something else to keep an eye out for. But I don't really want to ramble too long. I think the biggest thing to take away, though, is that the Fed, what the Fed did this week caught people by surprise, and their change of plans for next year might have an impact on the markets. And I'm not going to lie, it might actually be in favor of the left translated peak theory. And I say that because if they just make this decision starting next year to really slow down their cuts and potentially not cut at all, only do like 2 cuts, markets might not like that. But then at the same time, if they do cut too much and we get this recession because unemployment spikes or inflation starts going up again, Bitcoin won't like that either. Stock market won't like that either. So this is like we're at a really important and interesting time right now, because this is also the post-election year, post-halving year, when we're supposed to get our alt season. And you got to just take a step back, look at the I really do think the macroeconomic stuff is important, especially for crypto. Crypto is a function of excess liquidity that crypto is gonna, it's not gonna really be able to perform as well if these macroeconomic things are not really going as good. Which I think is really important. There was one other thing I wanted to also talk about, but let's just take a measurement real quick. I'm gonna draw this trend line again. Could do this. Well, going back down here, that would be 30%. If I went back down to the trend line, talking like a 40% correction. I could definitely see it happening. Look at 2021. So Bitcoin had a really good move December 2020, right? Had 4 strong weeks, but then January 2021, it had a nice correction from the wick to the bottom. It was 30%. So it could definitely happen again, 30%. Like I said, Bitcoin has gone like 800 days without a 30% correction when looking at daily closes, which is pretty crazy. It's the longest it's ever gone. So something to definitely keep an eye out for. Other than that, though, the last thing I'll probably bring up is Bitcoin dominance. So Bitcoin dominance, I feel like it could go a few ways, but I think it's definitely possible that this 61% top could be the top. But it's just interesting that it's back above its 20 week and actually made it all the way back to 59%. It's pretty crazy. Could it put it a new high? It definitely could. I mean, let's look at the previous cycles. Let's see what happened. So back in 2020, it did put in this high September 2019, but then it ended up putting a new high in December 2020. So it could. Is it going to take that long to? Probably not. I think if Bitcoin dominance is going to put in a new high, it's probably going to happen in the next few weeks, I'm going to assume, unless something really happens like next year that causes it. But I think it's near the top if it hasn't put it in already. But like I said, it's very possible that the top is in. But yeah, I don't really got much else to talk about. I think one thing that we got to keep an eye out for is Bitcoin dominance. Always keep an eye out for the alt Bitcoin pairs. And let's see what Bitcoin does going into the end of the year. Right now, it's currently down 6% for the week. It's had a crazy day today and yesterday. I'm going to wrap it up, though. If you guys have any questions, comments, leave it in the comment section below. Even though this is a stream. But if you guys also disagree with me, put it in the comments and flame me. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me what altcoins I should be buying. And maybe I'll check it out.